Welcome to You Sip, I Sip, a weekly podcast with Northern Lights Winery founder Doug Bell, exploring the experiences from leaders in business, social media, and family. Now here's this week's exceptional guest.
Welcome to You Sip, I Sip. My name's Doug Bell and the host of the podcast. I have Alex Watt with me today, who's from Braided Directions. Now, this is going to be a great conversation about something we haven't really dug into on this podcast before. I'm tremendously excited about it. Something I am certainly not an expert in, which is, women's health and sexuality, which is very, very much is interesting, not only to our listeners, but, we often don't get into these conversations because they're relatively uncomfortable. That's why I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you for coming today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I know you're a mom and you've got a lot of other things to cover off. But before we get started with what you're doing right now, I wanted to dig into your origin story. So tell us a little bit about where you grew up and how things all started.
So I grew up in Nanaimo initially and then moved to Prince George at the age of 4. We came here because my family immigrated from Germany, my great-grandparents, and so my mother came back to join them when they were sick. So we came back to PG. It's interesting because I grew up with a single mom, which is kind of the catalyst for everything. Growing up underprivileged, low income, struggling often, and not having a present parent is kind of what guided me to where I am now.
That's interesting. And so, growing up in that situation, were you an only child or did you have siblings as well?
So I had a younger brother and I actually parented him most of our childhood. And he even says that now. He's like, well, that's my mom, even though I'm his sister. And so it was wonderful because the three of us did stick together. And I'm really grateful for what my mom was able to give us. But I'm also grateful I was able to be the rock for my brother because he was younger. Yeah. And he didn't know what was, they're young and they don't really know what's going on.
So tell me a little bit about those early years and having to take responsibility for another person at a younger age. That must have kind of guided you towards what you're trying to do now, which is, supporting people and helping people.
Yeah. And so I know that it is trauma, and there is trauma from having your inner child and your, younger age moments taken away from you. But the beauty in it now is that I get to recreate those moments with my own kids. So then it was hard because I feel like I lost out on certain things. There's certain things that I never got to experience or be a part of. And there's sometimes you look back and you feel kind of guilty and sad. But at the end of the day, it's like that was the best that could happen at that moment. I was able to stay with my mom and we were able to be a family. But taking care of my brother was interesting. He's a great human. He's a great dad now. And so I'm grateful I was able to keep that relationship with him. So I get to watch him parent his own son now. And that's pretty powerful.
So maybe at what age did you move to Prince George? And in those first few years of growing up, kind of where in the area did you grow up? And tell us a little bit more about the time.
So we lived in the Bull and I went to Central Fort George Traditional School. So all the way till grade 6. And it was really cool back then. Lots of kids there, lots of good friends. And we lived in the lower area. So lots of the other kids were struggling with the same things we were doing. Their parents were busy. Their parents were gone. So a lot of times it was like meet at the field and go play baseball. And then parents yelling at dark. It was that kind of childhood. But we all stuck together. That was why we were able to do that, is lots of parents were working and it was just us. So I really enjoyed that. That's like although there's struggles, that was a good time in our life.
It's very interesting because you talk about something that I think as a society, we've really got a wide, vast array of opinions on, which is, when you are younger, how much is overbearing and how much, freedom should you give your children? And I know as a father of a young son myself, I often catch myself really kind of becoming overprotective in a lot of ways. And I understand how it happens. But, we all, I shouldn't say we all, but many of us remember a childhood where we spent our evenings and our weekends out with friends in the field, in a park, outside, doing a lot of different things. And now it seems like there's a lot more judgment about that kind of thing. Can you, what do you think now that you're a mom and you've kind of seen both sides of it?
Well, it was hard because I had childhood trauma. I really had to reel in how I parented. Because in the beginning, I didn't even want people babysitting. I was like, no, nobody can come near. And then it's like, well, that's not realistic. We still have to be able to live our lives. So I've tried to branch out, and I've done lots of education, and like through my social work degree and stuff. I like to call it like wild child living, I call it, because I let them do stuff, but with the information, they're no. So if they're in a scary situation, I'm like, do you feel safe? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, okay, if you fall, you feel safe. But it's still like, I still catch myself stumbling because I don't want to overparent them, but I also don't want them to get hurt. So it's that fine line we walk. It's like they still need to have the ability to learn things and try out and fall down, because that's part of growing in life. But at what point do we interfere? It's like, well, and I'm constantly checking myself over and over again. It's like, do I need to interfere right now? Are they safe? Is anything going to happen? Are they going to, sounds bad, but are they going to die? No? Okay, then we're okay. And I have to remind myself, because those are traumas that I carry from my own childhood.
And so as you grew a little bit older, you went into high school here in the city of Prince George as well. And tell us about how your family evolved and developed over time.
So grade 6, we moved out to Pineview. My mom met a man, moved in, blended family, all that chaos and beautifulness. And it was interesting because I found myself starting to get angry. That was when the anger started to come out. It's like, well, I was going into high school and I was getting angry as the blended family stuff started coming. And actually, I joined wrestling, and I wrestled all through high school. And that was part of like my outlet. It allowed me to feel in control and excited and passionate about something. And it was something healthy I could do. When I could see the path to going to the unhealthy way, I chose to not. So it was interesting. But I started in grade 7. And then it went to grade 8. I got the same wrestling coach, Louis Van Grudel, still coaches here. He's still awesome. Went to PGSS and wrestled all through high school.
Wrestling, sports, different activities are so important, especially for individuals when they are going through difficult, upbringings, and they're trying to release and find some outlets. I know from coaching, I coached for quite a few years in the high school system, and one of the things that was really apparent is the vast array of upbringings that everybody has, and they're trying to meld them together within a school system. Yet one of the things that was really interesting is when you brought people in to a team environment, or having the tutelage of a coach or what that might be, you really started to develop these relationships with them that you could get in on a deeper kind of level. And I think for a lot of coaches, you really have to think about how they are, taking situations, and it's not just about the sport. It actually kind of raises above this. You talked about this person. Would you consider them a mentor?
Oh yeah, he was awesome. And like, I still run into him and say hey to him, and like, I appreciate him. He gently guided me and my stubbornness by supporting me and being like, don't give up. He watched me get like beat the whole first year. Just this young girl, not sure what she's doing, trying to understand myself and like the sport. And not many women were wrestling then either. So there wasn't a bunch of us. And he just kept reminding me like, don't get beat, or like, don't give up. You got this. And I'm grateful for that, because the odds had always been stacked against me.
And after you started getting maybe on a bit of a roll and you started building your confidence a bit more, was that always the positive outlet, or did you also have some times when maybe you did venture into more negative territory?
Oh, there's always been negative territory, especially as a teen. And when you start to go into certain team sports, there is a certain aspect of things where it is negative. There is a time where it's like drinking and drugs do come into play. And also in the realm of wrestling, there's also eating disorders, which is not really talked about a bunch, because we're constantly forced to weigh in. And we wrestle in categories based upon our weight. And there's a time where a coach, who wasn't my coach, told me, well, if you did drugs for a month, you would wrestle in a better category and you would win more. And I was like, wow.
So how did you take that information in? I mean, that's a lot for somebody at a young age.
Well, especially since like I grew up with a single mom, and it wasn't great what was going on there. And I saw the partying and I saw the hurt, right? Young person raising a child. It's also a child raising a child, right? And so because I've always been mature, I knew that. But being told that, I was like, okay, well, I'm already struggling like being a woman and a teenager. So now I have to struggle with that. It was very interesting. It's very interesting because I was trying to make the BC team. at that point.
Yeah.
And my whole goal was I'm going to win. I'm going to make the BC team. I'm going to get out of Prince George. I'm going to make a name for myself. I'm going to be somebody.
I bet for yourself, and you seem very appreciative of your family, even though you've gone through difficult times. When there might be people listening right now that are in a similar situation, or maybe they know people that are in this situation, it's very hard to have these conversations, especially with young people, because you do want to go through the parents through proper channels. But at the same time, there are situations out there where, you have to be that like mentor, that force. What's like the appropriate way to approach a situation where you see somebody who could fall down this path and you want to lift them up and bring them into a better direction?
Well, I think for people, but definitely for me, as in social work, I've always worked with youth. And I coached wrestling for a while too, as with youth. And so I've always been like a constant, almost anti-energy for everybody. And so the appropriate conversations are with the adults present. It's like, hey, I've noticed this is going on. Would you be okay if we had a conversation? Maybe I can help guide them. Maybe I can be consistent for them. Is there anything you can need? Like offering that gentle support, not the negative, not being like you're failing, you need to help. You just need to hold space. This is what I'm all about. It's always like holding sacred space. How do people feel? Just letting them have that moment to be seen and without judgment. And so approaching adult figures and teens and being like, look, together you can overcome this. I did it. This is my story. This is who I am.
And you were probably thinking a lot about how you have this passion for supporting people and helping people. Once you graduated, what did you do next?
So I graduated high school. I did get my scholarships. I did get an offer to leave Prince George for wrestling, and I fell in love and chose not to. And I don't have any regrets. We've been together 17 years, and I'm really grateful for him. But then I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do? I was going to become a wrestler and do kinesiology. So now what? And so I went to CNC and I did my social work diploma there. And I started my bachelor's. I haven't finished it yet, but I did start it. And that brought huge opportunity into my life, because at first I was like, maybe I'll do nursing. And then I was like, but I'm passionate about people. And so I switched to social work, and I'm really grateful for that. I've worked with the Brain Injury Group. I've worked with NCASE. I've worked with Nestle Bay. I've worked with different areas in town on contracts, and I'm really grateful for it. They have brought so much to my life that there's not even words for it. Each interaction with them, all these kids that I got to hang out with and hold space for, I'm really grateful for that.
And did you go through a few different positions before you started building your own company, or is this something that you've kind of known right from day one that you wanted to do?
Well, actually, I did work with everybody first, and then it slowly, as I began to work with different people, I saw that there was a gap. There's this gap in our community between social work and medical. And it's like there's this beautiful space where people are not always being assisted. And it was young women who didn't know how to birth and didn't know how to even about their periods or their bodies. And I was like, okay, well, we should talk about that. And then I was filling in that gap for a while. And then I started attending births, and I was like, okay, so this is happening. And so I went and got certified as a doula. And I'm so grateful for that season of my life. I got to attend so many beautiful births.
Mm-hmm. It's such a cool thing. I mean, to be a doula, or involved in this magical part of a woman's life in the very beginning of every person's life, which can be a variety of things, yeah. From wonderful and magical to really scary and sometimes very tragic. And everybody has a different birth experience, and we totally understand that is there. But I really think it's interesting that you've kind of started to narrow your focus down on the things you're most passionate about. Was there a point where you said, like, these are things that I love more than anything else within my career, and I just want to do more of this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I tell people it's like I became the person I needed. And they laugh at me, and I'm like, no, but I really, really did. Because as soon as I started seeing the lack in the birth world, I was like, I had really traumatic births. And I didn't think that I could ever get pregnant. And I was told had infertility and odds stacked against me. And I was like, okay. So then I went through the infertility process, and all the hormone therapy and the treatments to get to where I was to be able to have kids. And I'm grateful for that. But the gap in there of no support and being quiet about it, we shouldn't talk about it. We shouldn't talk about miscarriages, or it's kind of taboo. We should just deal with it. And it's like, I knew that it wasn't. And it wasn't right to be witnessing these other women go through that. So I just became very passionate about my own struggles. And I was like, okay, so I overcame it and this is how it worked for me. And I started enrolling in courses in trauma care and birthing care and all kinds of things. And I ran to the hills with it. And I'm really grateful for that. But definitely the infertility and the miscarriages started my passion for women. And although we're talking about women, I am very passionate about couples too. Like, I support the husbands just as much as I support the women. It's just harder to be inviting for them. Women are more open to me. Sometimes men are like, I don't know what she's doing. And then they talk to me and they become comfortable and understand that I just hold space for them.
Yeah, I think those two things that you mentioned are two of the least talked about things probably in the world. And I know I've got lots of friends who have had different issues over the years, and they will often not want to talk about it. But there are some that have, and as more and more people have been able to open up about infertility and miscarriages, among a variety of other things, you are starting to see that happen, but it is very slow, and it seems like it's within a very tight niche group. Most people who are thinking about having their first child do not understand how difficult it might be, and or they don't have any concept of the process. As a matter of fact, even in most like healthy relationships with parents and children, these things are not discussed. Why do you think that is, and what do we need to do to change that?
That's a very good question. I think the biggest thing for me is I think there's so much shame that everybody's worried about, that sex is associated with shame or sex is associated with abuse. And they're very, very different things. And so we start talking to our shame and we start honoring it and being like, it's not really shameful. And then it allows people to be like, okay, because they start to open up. The walls start to come down and they feel comfortable. But I think shame is the big leader of why we don't talk about it. But the biggest thing is like all my male friends, because I wrestled, I have all growing up, right? Like it's like they're all there, know everything. They know about every miscarriage I've had. They've been there. They now talk about it with their wives. And I feel like if I can help one person, then the ripple effect will slowly go out. And then we start having these conversations. And people naturally just tell me things. They'll just sit down and they'll be like, and I'll be like, it's okay. People tell me stuff all the time. And then they're embarrassed. I'm like, you don't need to be embarrassed. But I think if we just start opening these spaces for people to feel comfortable and validated and understood, and we start being very like truthful, very raw, truthful to people, then our kids are going to watch us walk this path and be able to say it too. Like my boys could tell you everything about birth. They could talk about your ear off, the poor teachers at school, but I'm grateful for that because then they're open to tell me those things. And I started young. It is age appropriate what they know, but I always wanted them to be able to tell me if something was wrong because of my own abuse stuff. I wanted them to be able to come to me and tell me the exact details and be raw with me so that I could protect them. So that's my way of parenting for them.
Yeah, there's a level of safety that people have to feel within any relationship, but at the same time, there's these society norms that we talk about. And it's very hard to change, especially the older generation's kind of understanding of what that norm should be. For instance, we often talk about, well, you don't tell anyone you're pregnant for 3 months.
Yes.
Right? After 3 months, you can say, well, I mean, by that point, most people that are close to you already know for a variety of reasons, whether that, be that you're gaining a little bit of weight or, or they've seen you drink a glass of wine with dinner. Now you're not. All these things kind of happen. But it still seems like that society norm is there. The other thing that always fascinates me is, of course, this Instagram culture we have. People are just set on showing the best parts of their lives, and they're not necessarily showing the real things that are happening on a day-to-day basis. And it's my belief that we need to balance, right? We need to be real. We need to actually talk about the things that are happening to us. And that would create a more careful scenario where people would feel comfortable with their friend coming up to them and saying, hey, I'm going through the same things as you, or, or I'm thinking about doing this and I know this is what you went through. How did you deal with it? It can be very healing for people as well. Is that true?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it's about access, because social media and technology is all of a sudden given access to everybody, and people feel like they have access to your life. And I feel like for some people that's caused them to lock down harder. Whereas if we open up space with boundaries and be like, no, we can talk about this, and yes, I will share that with you, then you're allowing that space for them to come in. For me personally, it's like I need my children to understand that me and my husband may not agree, but that doesn't mean we've given up. We're two different people. We have different dreams and goals. Yes, they intertwine, but sometimes it's different, right? Allowing them to see conflict in a healthy way so that they don't expect, and they don't see social media and be like, well, we're not in love like that. It's like, well, that's not real love, right? It's like, we're going to have struggles. There's going to be days where I love you, and there's going to be days where I just don't like you. And that's totally natural and part of the process. But to remind them not to give up, because that's the big thing. Everybody thinks that we can just give up. And instead of investing our time and our healing in each other, we're just taking our toxic cycle to the next person.
What are some of the other things and services that you offer amongst, obviously this and previously the doula servicing?
So right now I'm offering some programs and some courses geared towards bringing mothers back to their bodies. That's the big focus for the next 3 months is all about the body, being present, practicing mindfulness practices, and being able to breathe, regulating yourself so that you're not feeling external energy of our kids' chaos and freaking out. So that's something I'm focused on right now. And I offer grief work. So talking about miscarriages, loss, partner loss, and just loss of your own anatomy, because I had a hysterectomy and for a while I felt not aligned anymore. I was like, well, I'm not a woman and I can't have kids anymore. So what does that look like? So really came back to my own body and learned to love it. So I offered those kind of services.
And how do you feel like the group, the people that are coming to you right now, are they different than the ones that used to come to you, or are you really finding kind of the same things coming up?
Oh no, they're totally different than the couples I was working with before. And I really appreciate that because I'm very inclusive. I say women, and some of my posts say just women, but I'm very open to any and all healing. When we're talking about womb wounds, which is like parent wounds, mother wounds, family wounds, we all carry them. We all have them. So when you're dealing with a masculine man who's coming to me for services because he's stuck and he's worried and he wants to support his wife, and I'm working with both, it's super powerful. It's great. I'm so grateful for that. So I think the big thing is being super inclusive has really kicked down the walls, because I'm not just a doula giving birth, like helping people give birth. I'm this woman, wild woman.
The society norm of really focusing on women and when it comes to children and childbirth is certainly strong. I remember when my wife was pregnant with our child, going out and searching for all this information. I was really discouraged for a long period of time because all of the information that I received was talking directly to the women, which obviously it makes a lot of sense why it was done that way. The only real asset that I ever found for guys was a podcast called Dad University, which is actually a pretty good podcast for new dads. But what do we need to do? Because I know from a guy's standpoint, this is not something, again, that's comfortable for us, because not only are we trying to work with our partners to support them and go through this process, we don't necessarily have all those resources and support, but also we feel guilty because we don't necessarily feel like we are not the ones who are giving birth. It is not our, pain to bear. And therefore we kind of feel like, in a lot of ways, a lot of not necessarily shame, but guilt in trying to receive support.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can understand that, because I know that for fathers, they don't always feel connected to the baby until the baby's born, or until they can feel the kiss.
Perhaps not even after.
And not even that. And that's okay, right? But we are shaming people because social media, once again, shows like everything's perfect. You have a baby and you're so in love. And it's like, but it's not like that. It's not always like that. So when you portray it to be easy and simple like that, we're putting more shame on parents, which is causing postpartum depression for men too. Why wouldn't you want to support the person you love? And how can you do that? You're right. And so I think something powerful is I try to speak to that audience. I try to put myself out there and to be different, because I do. When I've been in births, I've supported dads. I have helped them, talked them through things, told them stuff, because nurses come in and they talk to the mom and then they leave. And then the dad's sitting there wondering what just happened or what's going to happen. So then I would talk to them and be like, are you okay? Because how you're feeling does matter too. Yes, I do care about the mother too, but you are a union. You are a group. And together you're coming out of here, a father and a mother. And so there's 3 births, not just one.
You change very greatly when you have a child, both the men and the women, and the families, grandparents, and there's a lot of confusing conflict and information coming in all the time, and it's so personal for each couple and each individual going through it at any point that they need to feel a lot of safety.
Yeah.
How do you make them feel safe?
A lot of in-home interaction. I don't just do Zoom meetings. I go in and I sit with them and I'm like, what do you need right now? What can I support for you? What resources can I outsource for you? Because there's only so much I can do, and I know my limits. It's like, do you need another counselor? I know somebody. What do you want this? And really being present for them and not telling them what's right or wrong. It's like, what is working for you guys and what do you need help with? How can I assist you? And giving multiple options. Because when we educate people, they make decisions for their own good and for their partner's good, but together, instead of just being like, this is wrong and this is right? You're like, no, but you could do any of these. What works for you guys?
And when you're going through this process, you probably create a lot of friendships as well, and they want to stick with you after. Is that true?
Yeah, there's a lot of friendships. I'm friends with most of the doula moms that I have been through life, through their birth and through our life, and we connect on Facebook and they follow me and they still attend some courses I throw now. But there are times where there's boundaries. It's like, this was my work and this is now. And I'm very smart about that. I have my own private Facebook account, and then I have an open one, and my open one's business and work stuff. And so anyone's allowed to follow that one, but then stuff about my family, I keep to myself.
So how do you find the line drawn between your family life and your business life? And how has your job affected your family?
Okay, so that's a really good question, actually, because I switched from being a doula to just sexual health when we adopted our last son. And it was the fact that his abandonment issues and my trauma heightening up from his adoption, I couldn't just leave in the middle of the night. I couldn't just drop everything and leave for 55 hours and everything would be okay. So I really had to switch gears for the better of our family. And that's when I did it. It was like they came first, and his comfort within our home. And our process actually went really quick compared to most adoptions. So I really needed him to be safe and feel safe. So that's when I really switched. And that's when I started making things more close too. It's like we were adopting. Nobody actually knew we were adopting until I was like, surprise, we're coming home with a kid.
That's interesting to hear. I'm actually quite surprised that you kept that internal to yourself as well.
So I kept that internal to myself because when you go through the adoption process through the ministry, it is very locked down. Everything's hush hush. It's the same as when I was working in social work. I do really value protocols and procedures, and I'm really tight on those things. So I wasn't really shocked. I also didn't want to tell everybody in case we never were matched. I didn't want my parents to be like, or my husband's parents to be like, when are we getting a grandson or a granddaughter? Because we didn't know if that was guaranteed. It's not guaranteed. So that was part of the lockdownness.
I'd love to hear more about the process for adopting children, because I would imagine that most people listening right now have never been through that, and maybe some are thinking about it, maybe they're not. But how does that work? Because you're taking responsibility for a human life. Often, not always, but often, it comes with its own set of circumstances, which could be traumatic for the children. It could be traumatic for the incoming family as well.
Yeah, so we chose to adopt because I had a hysterectomy and all the infertility issues we had. Plus, I was passionate about helping other youth because of my upbringing. And so we applied with the ministry. they go through tons of process, tons of background, and then you start a course. It's a parenting course, and that course lasts for 3 months, I think 12 weeks around there. And you go through the process, and then you get home visits where a social worker comes into your home and watches your day to life and talks with you for 2 hours or talks with your kids. And that was really uncomfortable because I've been on the other side. I've done home visits. So having someone come into my house and then ask these questions was very funny to me because I was like, I'm not too sure how this feels. And then through that process, you go into a list, and the list gets posted to all the social workers in BC. And then they start matching, an algorithm matches you with kids. And then if the social worker of that kid thinks you're a good fit, then they will approach your social worker, who then contacts you and says, there's a kid.
And how long does that process take sometimes?
That process can take a long time. That process, there are people still sitting in process. And so I think there's a little part of me was guilty too, because I was like, we got approved really quick. And we did because of my social work stuff. And we got a kid really quick, and there's people that didn't. But we were also open to adopting older. And that's the problem, is tons of these kids in the ministry right now are older and are aging out and not getting the opportunity to be in what they call forever homes.
My experience with adoption is through an organization called the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. And it's put on through the Wendy's international system, of course, where Wendy's franchises as well. And over the years, one of the things that was really we really focused on was raising money to get recruiters to recruit families, right? In particular, their focus was on finding forever homes for children that were a little bit older or had disabilities, or because a lot of families, people don't realize, but many people who are given up for adoption are being given up for adoption for a variety of reasons. And so it can be very difficult. And so many children go through the first 18 years of their life in foster care or in homes, and then end up basically on your 18th birthday, happy birthday. Yeah. Here's like $200. You're now out on your own. Mm-hmm. And it's incredibly sad what these individuals go through, and it just sets themselves up for, it's so much more difficult for them to be successful. Yeah. By the way, so many of them are successful, and there's great stories, but without that family environment, it's really difficult. Going through this process, what would you tell to potential families who are looking at this maybe as an option for them?
I think that you really need to talk with your social worker and get clear on things, because they ask you things like, do you want a child with special needs? And parents immediately turn it down because they think, oh, well, they have a large disability, or there's something wrong. And it's like, well, did you actually know that special needs means that their mother abandoned them? That is just like, sometimes it's a smaller trauma and you just said no. And that takes 80% of the kids off your table, right? Because your options are based on what you're willing to raise and who you're willing to, like the things you're willing to do. And with my adoption, he was special needs, and he has an open adoption, which would shock some people, but I have an open adoption. Therefore, I have relationships with his family and I sustain them. And I'm really grateful for that, because it's brought a lot of learning for myself and powerful moments. And as the biological ones, they say, well, we just got bigger. Our family just got bigger. To them, it wasn't weird. It's never been weird. Mm-hmm. And so it's been very cool. But I think really get clear on what you want, what you're willing to handle. Be very truthful about it, because if you're not capable of handling it, a child doesn't deserve to go back into the system because you failed them. Being very aware of what your family can go through and what you don't want to go through. But ask your questions, get educated, do lots of courses, reach out to people who have adopted, ask me. Like, I'm willing to talk about it, but really do a lot. There's so many really great kids, and if I could adopt 100, I would. So
absolutely. And you're a great resource for people to go to if they're thinking about it, but they're not really sure. So certainly we're gonna share some information about that a little bit later on. What are some of the misconceptions about your field that you feel are strong?
Yeah, so when we talk about like sexuality, sensuality, and pleasure and desire, everyone thinks it's just sex. And it's like, no, I'm actually asking you to like make goals in your life and go get them. And how do you feed yourself to feel good? And what did you do to give yourself good intentions, and being intentional in life, moving in a good way? Clearing out your mind is not just sex. That's just part of it. It's not the whole package. Being able to ask somebody what you want and what you need. Being able to look at your partner and be like, I need you to listen to me, or right now I need just quality time. Can we just shut things off? Because nobody feels comfortable to always go there. And so that's part of it. It's like empowering people to say what they need.
What are some of the most common problems that you find? And I don't want to call them problems, but what are some of the most common issues that you help people with in your field?
That's a good. So definitely the connection back to self after giving birth. Women often are touched out, and we are struggling to understand our own bodies at that point. Hormones do some really beautiful and crazy things at the same time, right? So that's one main focus, is really allowing women to get back to being just a woman. You're a mother and you are this and you work this job and you wear several hats, but who are you as a person and what fills you back up? Because when we pour from empty cups, that causes way too much stress for all of us, and you get depression and anxiety and everything that comes with that. So that's one main area. The other, that's like the big area. The other one is grief of child loss, grief of partner loss. Those are kind of the areas I always laugh, because I'm like, I'm at both ends of the spectrum, death and life. But those are the main things that people come to me for.
And they're so intertwined, really.
Yeah, they really are. Mm-hmm.
And so as you move forward into the future, what are some of the things you're hoping to accomplish and help other people accomplish?
I would love to open a house where it's like a community drop-in for women, and women can bring their children and they can come baby wear, and we can commune together and really bring back that community aspect and grandmother love that many of us are missing. We're missing the old ways where you could go next door and get a cup of sugar and, sit and have tea and talk to somebody and not have to filter it out. I want a space where people can come and not have to filter and walk through the door and feel like they're at home.
And you're, I'm sure, going to accomplish that. You are clearly a very driven individual, and you've accomplished quite a bit already, and you're still relatively young, so you can do a lot more. What would you like to say to the listeners who maybe have a lot of questions about some of the things that you offer services for, but maybe hasn't been covered off today?
I just think it's really important to remind yourself that my name is Braided Directions, and the braid is all about mind, body, spirit, connecting it. So as we braid that, we braid love and all the good things into our lives. And it's always about connecting with your inner self. It's not looking outside of yourself. I hold space for people to connect with what they already know, what they already are passionate about and driven for within themselves to move forward. And that's, at the end of the day, it's like you can have as many titles as you want, but if you don't hold sacred space for people to feel safe, they're not able to work through the things they need to.
You're such a wealth of knowledge. I really appreciate you coming out today to enlighten our listeners. I think that there's a ton of information, a lot to digest in today's episode. So I really ask that everyone who's listening, go follow you, Braided Directions. Alex Watt, of course, you've been incredible, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what you do in the future. I think it's going to be fantastic. So this is the end of the episode today. Thank you so much for listening. This is Doug Bell from USIP ISIP, and we'll see you next week. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to USIP ISIP. Please hit the 5-star rating and leave us a review. If you'd like to learn more about Northern Lights Winery, text us at 604-670-4046 or visit us on social media at Northern Lights Winery.